Welcome to the Scale Up Valley podcast, where we bring the best founders and investors to help you scale your business from 1 million to 1 trillion. Today's guest is a very special one. His name is Ben, very well known in the Brazilian ecosystem and the Latam ecosystem, and is now with Kamino and is the founder of Kamino. Ben, welcome to the show.
Thank you very much. It's a pleasure to be here.
Likewise, and full disclosure, we had also your co-founder in the past episode 2000 not yet 248 that was released on the 20th of October of 22. And we really recommend you to also go listen to that episode. And today it's all about Ben. Ben has an amazing track record in the ecosystem, as I said before. Ben, why don't you introduce yourself much better than myself, and so the audience can get to know more about you.
Okay, awesome. So I'm actually originally from the United States, and then worked out of school in corporate finance, first in the US, and then for a time in Brazil, and then a few years in Europe. I ended up doing an MBA at Wharton, and then coming down to Brazil full time way back in 2007, initially with McKinsey, and then running Groupon down here during the explosion in the daily deal space. And that was really my first, experience working in kind of this very dynamic startup environment in Brazil. So, incredible experience, very intense. We were doing like the rocket style growth and execution. And then in 2012, after the IPO of Groupon, I decided to leave to start something new from scratch and founded GuiaBolso with a friend who I'd met at McKinsey, Thiago. And so at the time, it was, I think e-commerce was starting to be a theme that was popular in Brazil and getting funding. Finances was definitely not. So we had a lot of skepticism around, even the thesis. And we had to explain, what like financial technology, in quotes, fintech, because nobody knew the term. Obviously, that's changed a lot. And so over almost 10 years, we basically built the largest personal finance app in the country. So we had about 6 million total users. We built what is now referred to as open banking. At the time, it was there was a lot of questions and some resistance from some of the big banks, but essentially we allowed users to aggregate their banking data, do their financial management, and then get access to better financial products. We sold to PicPay, which is a very large digital wallet, digital bank, last year. And then I decided to found Kamino together with two friends who I actually worked with at Groupon. So way back in the day, they both went on to be serial entrepreneurs as well. So we got back together and really trying to solve a lot of the problems that we faced as entrepreneurs in fast-growing companies, particularly on the financial management and operations side. And so creating with Kamino kind of a hub to help early stage companies get started faster and better, and then do the initial growth, but then also for larger more scaled companies who are growing quickly, help them to have their financial operations, their payments, all of their financial flows working much more smoothly through the Kamino platform.
Sounds amazing, and I can imagine what was the ecosystem at the time when you were able to IPO Groupon and started GuiaBolso in a space that, as you were saying, there was no fintech. The category was not known as fintech, let's say, which today it's completely obvious, but at the time it was not. So how is it being in a startup in such a different period of time, or such in different maturity stages of the ecosystem?
Yeah, it was interesting because back, when we started in 2012, everyone cited the bank's branch network as being their, defining advantage. And so they said, unless you have, tens of thousands of bank branches around the country, you really can't compete in terms of distribution. So obviously that's changed a lot. It's become a liability now. And so I think that's one of the biggest shifts that we've seen is really, even when we launched our first beta product with GuiaBolso, it was still a web-based tool because even apps were not obvious yet in Brazil. And then when we launched in 2014, our iPhone app, we became the #1 app with GuiaBolso, the #1 app in the entire app store. So very clearly, we became an app company, and we're like, okay, this is it a viable distribution model? And so I think that was really the tipping point of once consumers could get access to products via their phones and via apps. I think that was one thing that we saw as a huge kind of tailwind for fintechs. And then also the central bank in Brazil is now incredible. It's considered one of the top central banks in the world. So they went from being kind of very much more focused on overall financial stability and ensuring that the big banks were stable to actually supporting innovation, supporting competition, creating PIX, so the instant payment system, regulating open banking. So it's been also incredible to see the regulators, the shift there, and how much they've been supporting the startup and the fintech ecosystem. So I think those are two big things. And the last thing I would say, it was funny, I ran into a friend at Money 2020 in Las Vegas, but back in 2012, 2013, we had what was called a startup mansion. And so it was this house which had about 10 different startups, and it was just kind of one friend would refer another, all very, very early stage, so kind of pre-seed and seed startups. But within this kind of startup mansion, we actually would say, okay, who's a decent lawyer? How do I get a bank account open? We would do a lot of these like very basic, kind of ask for help because it was just impossible to do anything.
Right.
And that was very powerful as kind of this very small kind of non-scalable, but actually experience which helped us to get started and to grow. We're getting references from other founders. And 10 years later, there's still a lot of the same challenges happening in the ecosystem about just getting set up, getting operating. And so, with Kamino, we're kind of trying to create a scaled version of that. That experience that we had of having kind of people in a similar situation who understand exactly what you're going through and what type of service providers or solutions you might need.
Yeah, and I'm sure that a lot of people in the audience or should be asking themselves, why did you decide to move to Brazil and all the impact that you had in the ecosystem? Started with McKinsey, moving to Groupon, then GuiaBolso, now Kamino. So why such a passion for Brazil and the Latin market?
Yeah, I initially was studying Spanish. I went to study abroad in Chile for a year and during college, and so I kind of thought that somehow my path would go through LATAM, but Brazil really wasn't on my radar very much at the time because of the different language and everything else. And I came back, way down here, way back in the day, and backpacking around. I loved Brazil, and really kind of connected with the culture, and decided to learn Portuguese. And because of that, I actually got hired for my first job in this corporate finance role. Since I spoke Spanish and Portuguese, and I ended up being able to come down and help open the office here in Brazil. So also I found that working in Brazil was an incredible experience. Obviously, there's pros and cons to everything, but I liked, the generally more social and, friendlier style. And then, working at McKinsey, I kind of saw the real professional services here, which, is often kind of world-class. And I actually ended up, after McKinsey, I took a leave of absence and went to live for 3 months in Rocinha, the largest favela in Rio. So I did a restructuring project of an NGO there, just as a volunteer, living in the middle of the hillside. So I had a very different experience from McKinsey, but also incredible, eye-opening. And then once I started got into the startup scene, what I found is that you can try to solve much bigger problems in emerging markets in general, and Brazil in specific. So go after these kind of much more aspirational, large problems, have this massive impact on the ecosystem, which I think in the US, oftentimes is much harder to do. You often are going for like a very niche or nice to have solution rather than basic kind of solving these base problems. So fintech, health tech, ed tech, all of these in Brazil often are like very much just like basic, kind of platform layers, as opposed to like very point solutions. And so I think for me, that's super exciting to see the impact that you can have as a founder here.
Right. And there is something that you are also very passionate about, which is helping underrepresented founders and making the ecosystem a little bit more diverse. We still see a lot of funding coming to the usual suspects. Again, we don't want to discriminate also the ones who go to the Ivy League schools and so on. But if we can have the representation of all parts of society, and of course, gender is improving, but still a long way to go, and different races, etc. What is your point on that, and what are your thoughts about that?
I think, one thing nowadays, everyone talks about diversity, and it's kind of like a required, buzzword for most companies. But I think in practice, talking with women founders, for example, I still hear stories about, kind of this sexist comments or questions, from some VCs. And so I think, it's still clearly not a level playing field. And so, I'm putting in, more of my focus around how can I help, great women founders or diverse founders to kind of be on a more level playing field, and focus on also creating on the other side kind of a network of VCs who I know, are open to this and support this, so that, they can actually have a real shot. And, kind of one of the things that was interesting is that, a number of the women founders who I have angel invested in were actually ex-GuiaBolso. And so, the people who I worked with and were, product managers and things like this went out and created companies. And that's super cool to see, so people I know very well who kind of had the courage and went out and did it. And that was the starting point. And now, increasingly I get, other women founders, referred to me to try to help them, as they're starting their fundraising journey in particular.
Reputation being built.
Exactly. So I think, you need to make an initial effort, and then you get some critical mass. And, I think it's actually an advantage as, an angel investor, as a VC, if you can get also this great deal flow coming to you. Exactly. It's actually, a business opportunity as well as a social impact opportunity.
Especially as angel investor, because you don't have kind of a team to work for you on searching for that deal flow. It needs to be all almost inbound, and then you need to be able to also have not only the quantity but also the quality of the, or even more important, the quality of the deal flow. And I believe that, especially for someone like you, that you are super busy with your own venture now, at the same time trying to help the ecosystem, it might hurt you sometimes. It might be difficult, that you would like to do much more than what you actually do, and you are doing so much compared to the average person or the average founder, as you are in your, at least in your second, in your third scaling up, right, with Groupon. But I assume it's not an easy task to be able to support as an angel, support as a peer in the ecosystem, and still build a company again from scratch with Kamino.
Definitely not. One thing I would say, I found I'm very active as an Endeavor entrepreneur, Endeavor mentor, and so via Endeavor, I actually am able to have kind of a more scaled impact. And so doing sessions for 12 founders, 20 founders, so that 50 founders is a way to have a more scalable impact. And then also one of the things I was seeing doing mentoring sessions for Endeavor, so I was getting often the same questions. So like, okay, now I have a term sheet. My VC wants me to set up a company and holding company in Cayman. What do I do? Right. Or, I'm having this money finally, and now I'm trying to spend it, and I'm having all this friction. Like, what do I do? So that was actually one of the motivations for me to help create Kamino, was how can I solve this in a more scalable way rather than in one-on-one conversations. And so I think that has been interesting, is how do you kind of start to build up the scalable ways to help people, and hopefully if Kamino keeps growing, we'll keep having a wider and wider impact. And we also have that similar viewpoint of it shouldn't be because you have to be a repeat founder, or you have to be an Ivy League MBA to be able to figure out how to get the basic financial and corporate operations set up. It should be something which is fairly straightforward, which you can do confidently while you actually focus on the business and the problems that you're trying to solve.
Exactly. Yeah, because sometimes I like to say that sometimes the mission comes to you, right? You don't kind of go outside and you search for a mission. A lot of times something happens to you and you want to change that thing that happened to you, and then you start realizing that it was not only you, faced that problem, and you start seeing the scale of the problem and the impact that you can have solving the problem, not only for yourself, but for everyone that is facing or avoiding anyone else out there to face the same problem that you face it. And that becomes the motivation. And then it's about building a community, building a tribe to help you solve that problem, because nobody is able to solve a problem alone. And that's the power of the community and the power of network to solve problems that matter, right? And that can have an impact.
Yeah, for sure. And we see that clearly. Until you've kind of gone through it, you don't kind of understand the difficulty or the challenge and the impact that it can have. And so I definitely think it helps to be in that situation first, and even help other people understand what they're going to go through in the future, and therefore kind of why they should look for these type of solutions. We even found that many of the VCs didn't know what they were asking the founders to do when they required them to set up, a structure in Cayman and all this stuff. And so you're educating the VCs as well about what the founders are going through.
And this makes sense, because after 10 years of venture capital, even for founders, sometimes even we can see it in simple stuff like the OKRs, or there are people that never worked with OKRs. They don't know how to set up an objective or a key result or an initiative. And for the ones who have been working with that for 10 years, it might sound simple, but it's not simple for the ones who are doing that for the first time. Same with incorporation, with creating the legal company. What is a SAFE? What are the conditions of a SAFE? So what are the terms that I should do? How much dilution I should accept? So for founders who did it, or for especially for investors who are seeing this all the time, it's almost nuts, right? So it's so simple how people can't understand. And I think that's also the difference between the average teachers and the world-class teachers. They can emphasize and put themselves in the shoes of the learners and help them get there, right?
For sure. And I had worked previously in corporate finance, but I got into startups, and all the the terminology is different. Term sheet, what's a term sheet? What are the clauses here? So I had to also learn this. Even though I had the finance background, it didn't prepare me for startup finances necessarily. And so I think that's already a challenge. And then also coming out of McKinsey, so you're in this management consulting environment, and then you go to a startup like Groupon with the rocket guys, and it's like, okay, forget PowerPoint, forget analysis, like just go out and do it. And so it's a completely different mindset. So I think even people who have a good business background previously, aren't necessarily ready for kind of the speed and the constant testing and adjustments that you see in startups. And so it is helpful to talk and empathize with people that have gone through this before.
And learning all of this while you are always in a fine line between life and death as a startup, not to talk about the scaling up stage, but still there are some dangers there to run out of cash, or to not be able to grow as quickly as possible and become more a kind of a zombie company, and trying to find the way of going through that growth plateau and grow again. And again, it happens to every single company, even the most successful, I would say. Even in the super outliers, they all have faced serious crisis along the way.
It is just crazy how much the ecosystem has changed, because back 10 years ago when we were starting GuiaBolso, there were so few seed investors, and the money which was actually invested was so low. So now with Kamino, we did a pre-seed round with a PowerPoint before we launched, and it was almost the same size and the same valuation as our Series B round for GuiaBolso back in the day. So the things have changed so much, and to your point about you're worrying about runway. What's that?
Sorry, go ahead. Sorry, conclude.
No, I was just going to say, you were able to raise so much less money that you just already started usually with less runway. And so we were always, kind of worried, okay, we only have 6 months of runway, we have 4 months of runway. And, we were going through this like very tense, periods with my co-founder and I, Thiago, at GuiaBolso. And then, at some point as we grew and you got much larger, the employees said, okay, we want more visibility into the finances and everything else. And so we announced, okay, great news, guys, we have 14 months of runway. So this is like, a lot, right? And they were all like, wait, only 14 months? Oh my God, are we going to go bankrupt? Like, I'm scared. So we realized, too much sharing when the ecosystem's not ready is is also sometimes not good, but it's just, it's all your perspective, right? So founders are always, thinking about the runway, and you get down to 6 months at some point, and you're worried. And so when you have, later 14 months, it seems great. I think that changed obviously in 2020, 2021, with the round sizes and people being able to raise more quickly. But 2022 and onward, I think we're going to see a return to a little bit more kind of discipline and focus on burn and on runway.
Yeah, I was just asking for you to share a little bit what was the side of the round, and who is backing Kamino and so on, so people just can relate to what you were saying.
Awesome. Yeah, so we raised $6.1 million led by Inspired, which is a mostly fintech focused fund out of New York. And I've actually known the founder there for a long time. She founded LearnVest back in the day, and it was an early benchmark for GuiaBolso. So we talked to her and followed her company, and now she has this VC. So great. She's an ex fintech operator, so comes with that mentality. And then we also raised from a whole host of other funds. I think 8 other funds from QED, Flourish, GFC, Peak, as a whole host of folks there that are kind of early stage VCs that are now backing many of the companies which become customers of Kamino. So it's a great fit in terms of
exactly.
Customer acquisition channel. And we also brought in, I think, 25 angel investors, most of them unicorn founders. And so we have a great backing from great founders that have been through this and now are high volume angel investors and mentors and things. And so it's a way of kind of building out the community as quickly as possible.
Right. And were you very thoughtful about kind of building the process of fundraising, or it just came that people were start seeing that this was a huge opportunity and they start kind of reaching out to you, or any tips there on how to even for second time founders who want to kind of build a second startup and want to do the pre-seed fundraising process a little bit more smoothly and more strategic? Any advice from your experience on fundraising for Kamino?
I think the ecosystem had changed dramatically. So there were a dozen funds I'd never even heard of that were potential investors, and so I think you have a lot more money to choose from. For first-time founders and for second-time founders, really, I think the main thing is preparation of the story and the pitch, and making sure that you've really thought through this and tested this and seen where there might be holes or where you need to drill in a little bit more. So typically I always test with other entrepreneurs, and so we actually our first pitch was to Thiago, my ex co-founder from GuiaBolso, and then we pitched to Sergio Purio, the founder of Creditas. And those were, I joke, kind of the 2 hardest pitches, right? Because we were less, ready, and they're pretty sharp guys, and they pushed hard because they know us well. And then by the time we got to pitching to VCs, it was much easier because we were really ready with the pitch, ready with kind of the follow-up questions and everything. So I think that is huge, regardless of first time or second time founder. For second time founders, I think because there generally is more demands to back you. The key is choosing kind of who do you want to back you. So not just taking the money, but who do you want to be starting on this journey with you, and who's going to be there potentially for 10 years. And so being very selective there. I think first time founders have a little bit less kind of choice in the beginning, but once you get a term sheet, obviously then you can really go for kind of your dream lead investor.
Right. And before moving more into your angel investor would you like to just do some highlights about kind of the vision of Kamino? What are you dreaming of? And it's good to see that this was also a repeated pain point that you saw also as an endeavor mentor and as an angel investor, and that you wanted to solve that for founders. But would you like to share some highlights about kind of the future of Kamino? What is it in the back of your mind for the future?
Awesome. I think our longer term vision is being a financial operations hub for any fast growing company across LATAM, and so Brazil as well as the rest of LATAM, venture backed and non-venture backed companies. But that are growing quickly and typically are not very well understood by banks. They're not very well served by many kind of financial softwares and things like that. And so as we think about the stack that we're creating, it's basically a software stack with banking and finance products embedded, and helping companies with their operations, their growth, and the optimization of the business. And so, we're really thinking a lot about how do we kind of, embed the financial rails and the financial products within a very native kind of financial management and operations software. And so building, both at the same time. I think, many companies in fintechs in LATAM are building point solutions and then trying to expand from there. We have a thesis that we can create kind of this hub, plugging in different partners and different services, and then creating some of our own as well, and really being the one-stop shop and kind of, the one platform, hopefully, that startups are using to really run their business, and the CFOs are, consulting to make sure that the financial operations are running. So we long journey ahead, but we've launched the bank account and credit card and FX services and corporate setup services, and now building out some of the financial management capabilities. And so we're on our way, but a long way to go.
But it's good also for the founders who are listening to us. It's really to have this kind of this vision reverse engineering exercise that I love to do. It's kind of what will look like ourselves in the long term, in the midterm, and the short term. And of course, this is flexible because we learn along the way, and we need to reiterate on what is the long-term vision, the midterm vision, especially the midterm. Sometimes the long term should be a little bit more stable, kind of what is that North Star metric. I think it's also a very difficult exercise to understand what is that metric that will allow us to know if we are closer or not closer. And it also allows ourselves to not be always in a survival mode, to be able to go through the temptations, the challenges, and still be dreaming and feeling that we are progressing towards that long-term vision and that North Star metric. It might sound, for the ones who are listening, a little bit theoretical, but I'm finding what a lot of second and third time founders say, that culture is so important, and having clarity of vision, clarity of mission, and again, clear values, it really deserves or worth the investment to have it right.
Yeah, I think especially in a remote environment or a hybrid work environment, nowadays it's even more important and much more challenging to build the culture and to build the shared values and make sure that people are aligned with where you're trying to go. So I think, it needs to be a huge focus, even more so perhaps now than in the past. And you have to discover new ways to connect with your team and to make sure that the team is aligned. And I think, to your point as well, what's interesting now versus perhaps last year when it was kind of like this very accelerated environment is that, now it's actually good for founders who want to have some time to really, test things and learn and iterate and, really search for a viable product market fit with positive unit economics. I think, last year it was often just you could spend your way to lots of user growth. And then, when the funding ran out and the dust settled, people realized like, oh, I actually don't really have a viable product because I'm paying users to use it. And so, it's actually good. I actually prefer this kind of environment to the previous one in many ways. But you have to make sure that you're learning. I think that's kind of the key is if you are spending money and not learning and not iterating, then there's a problem. So I think that's what the smart investors are looking for first in the very early days. And then next is, do you understand your unit economics? Do you have a plan to really, scale the business with good unit economics from the very beginning?
Right. And this is a great point. Do you learn fast? And is the team able to go through adversity and find out a way of getting on the other side of the problem, still alive and motivated to keep moving forward? Easy said than done.
For sure. And I think that it comes a lot back to the founder and how resilient is the founder and how much will the founder adapt and listen to advisors and things like that. And those tend to be the really great founders. I had a funny, in terms of angel investing, one of the deals that I passed on back in the day was GymPass. And he was Cesar from McKinsey, and he pitched me, but it was a B2C business at the time. And essentially, if you're like a McKinsey consultant, you can use a gym in Brasilia or in Belo Horizonte. And I told him that it seemed, probably too small of a niche in terms of that business model. And maybe, if you could iterate on the business model, it would be better. So I ended up passing, even though I knew that he was a great, potential founder. And obviously Jim Pass has been extremely successful, and it says that was incredible. He navigated through the pandemic when all the gyms closed, and he had to completely change his business. And I feel like he's a great example in terms of this resilience and being able to adjust on the fly and really not get pulled down by macro events and things like that. And for me as an angel investor, the lesson of if it's someone who you think is great, invest in them and let them figure out the model, rather than worrying about too much about the model in the early days if it's in a big market and a real problem.
Again, the thesis that maybe pitched this is completely different than the current thesis, but that's why the team is, or the founders are so important at that stage, right? And this is a great example of a company that was able not only to be a regional leader, but kind of going beyond the LATAM region, which is something that I think that we are speaking also a lot now in LATAM, is how are we able to build global companies and global leaders in a certain category, and not only the LATAM leader. Of course, there is a lot of merit there, and there are huge opportunities of models that should be localized to LATAM. And within LATAM, there is so many different realities, again, as we like to say in Europe, or even about the US, that as native, much better, that there is not only one country called US, there are several countries within the same country. Even the way of doing business in the East Coast or the West Coast is completely different. Cool. And any other tips that you'd like to share also from an angel investor perspective, and now more for the founders who are maybe thinking that this is the right timing for me to start signing some checks? Maybe I'm at late seed or early Series A. I still feel that I have some money and I can put some time and some help and open my network and open my experience, and maybe I can do this for a lot of companies, but I can choose one or two to really have an higher impact, and then go into the stage where you are in, is how do I scale this support that I give to founders? What kind of organizations I want to associate with? But any advice on where to start and how to get going as a founder, as an angel investor?
Yeah, I mean, I think the first thing is really think about, what are your objectives, right? And so, I think differently than a VC fund, which probably needs to have, IRR or, the return on the capital as kind of the North Star. As an angel investor, you might have different objectives. And so, one of the things I think a lot about is, helping the underrepresented founders, trying to help create impact and find people who, if I can help them a little bit, then they can, run on their own. And so, depending on that, that's the starting point. And then thinking about how do I get kind of positive selection of those types of deals coming to me. And so whether it's, participating in different communities or Endeavor or things like this to start to meet, more founders as a way to start to see, kind of more deals, and then thinking about where you can really try to add value. And so, in my case, what I've realized is, if I kind of already know the founder, I'm going to help them anyway. It's someone that, I will support regardless, then I like putting some money to have skin in the game and some alignment and know that I'm helping them and have some money there. But if it's not somebody who you kind of previously know or who you might help anyway, then I found it, I can have more value if I actually understand the space. And so fintech, angel investments for me tend to make more sense. I'm, in an energy tech, for example, but I really don't add any value on the business side, so it's more, helping the founder, but it's the value add is less, kind of automatic. And so I've tried to, just, cut down a little bit in terms of more focus on fintech. Although with great founders, I've done, a number of investments in health tech and ed tech, for example, because I do think those are sectors that have a lot of problems and need, innovative solutions.
Yeah. But also I think it's important to think that sometimes we feel that we are not adding a lot of value outside of our own area of expertise, but it sometimes can be really life-changing to the founder who is on the other side, because again, we underestimate the amount of lessons that we learn along the journey, and something that seems super simple and super obvious to us. Again, it might change the trajectory of a startup and of a founder completely. Just adding this layer of the imposter syndrome that sometimes, oh, I don't feel that I'm adding any value here outside of my comfort zone, right? but definitely, I'm sure that it can be very transformative for the ones who have that support. And sometimes it's only being there and just saying, yeah, this is normal. I faced it myself, and just keep going, and I'm here for you. Just this kind of message, and just 15 minutes to say that, and just to listen, it can make a huge difference for a founder, right?
I think so, especially the empathy and oftentimes if people have boards where the board members are not ex-operators or ex-founders, so they're coming from like a very financial mentality, it can be very frustrating. So it is helpful for founders to have, some type of valve, and actually people are talking about it more, but if you don't have a great support network of, other founders or within, kind of your current community, go out and find a coach, find a psychologist, find somebody, because it's a long journey and it's a hard journey, and it is important to have these kind of valves, people that understand you and have empathy. I think that's really key in order to grow, and and then there are other things which are not the core of your business, but that you need to build this type of model. And so the kind of scaled venture financing, for example, some of when we were starting GuiaBolso, some of the best advice I was getting from fundraising was the founder of an online baby clothes, store, baby.com. And he was just a great fundraiser. And so, you look at my deck and I don't see anywhere where it says you're gonna be the biggest financial services company in Latin America. I was like, that's crazy to say that. You need to be more aggressive. And so, it's, I think, that's great. And a lot of, founders helped me in the early days. And I think it's great to give back. And actually, as a founder, when you are giving back, it's good for you often because you're helping other people to solve problems, even if you're stuck on your problem. So I think it creates a great dynamic for both sides, actually, both, people getting help as well as the people who are giving back.
Also a common question, and we are seeing some players in the ecosystem, for instance, Latitude is trying to do that effort, Brian trying to put together an angel list. So sometimes for first-time founders, understanding who they should reach out to. So because sometimes, of course, we know about the fundraising nowadays that you need to look to the portfolio of the VC, understand the investment thesis before even asking for a call or looking for a warm intro to that VC. And in a certain way, the same happens with angel, but the question there is the fragmentation is much bigger. So for a founder doing all that homework of understanding what are the angels that have experience in that kind of vertical, it might be a very tough task to go through. And any advice there on how to identify the angels that might have a fit with your thesis?
Yeah, I mean, I think the best thing for founders who are just starting out, who don't have the whole network, is try to get angels who have worked with you before. So maybe your former boss or people that really know you. I think that's like the first step, is to have people like that, because it's a validation that they believe in you, people who know you better than maybe the VCs do. And so, that's kind of the starting point. And then oftentimes they'll be able to make introductions, to other angels, and then also via the funds. And sometimes even before a fund invests in you, maybe you meet with them and they say, we'd love to stay in touch. We'd love to help. You can say, okay, so I want to reach this angel, who you've invested in before, right. So ask and try to see which funds are going to actually help you. I think in Brazil now you have many more kind of what I say are like professional pro founder angels. In the old days, 10 years ago, it was a lot of people that had a very exploitative mentality. I think not a founder first mentality, and they wanted to do 20-page investment documents for an angel investment. And so we had in many cases a negative experience back in the day. And then once we started reaching great US angel investors, we actually saw like what amazing angel investors are. After a 15-minute coffee, we had investors wanting to put in money just because they kind of believed in us and knew our investors. And So we saw like a very different side to it. And I think nowadays it's becoming more common in LATAM, but, definitely it should be someone you identify with, somebody that seems like they want to help you, that they have your best interests at heart, because I don't think an angel should be worried about, their returns in these early days. I should be about trying to help you get to the next stage.
Yeah. And it's good that you say that, because the founder is already under a lot of pressure, and if he feels that he's also not able to be open with the angel investor, because of course he's investing his or her own money, and a lot of times it's not. It's a different kind of business and different kind of motivation of what you just said. Sometimes that money is very hard to earn, and the founder might be a little bit afraid. So maybe I'm not sure about what I'm doing, and then he or she will not ask for help when it's needed, because what might the angel think about my own understanding of the problem that I'm solving? And everyone has ups and downs, and sometimes we feel that we have the solution and we know what we need to do in order to get closer to the vision, and sometimes we are lost, and we think, what the hell am I doing here? And it's normal.
Yeah, I think also it's impossible for the founder to be an expert at everything, right? So you're never going to be the best person about, who knows everything about growth and everything about credit and everything about tech and everything else. And so also bringing in some angels that have, very deep, specific technical expertise is extremely helpful to help your
Good point.
team.
Exactly.
So we were fortunate at GuiaBolso to have like one of the top growth guys in the entire world, one of the top security, data security guys in the entire world. And so that makes a huge difference, because you just don't have time to really become an expert on all those topics.
Kind of list the skills that you need, and what are kind of your weak spots, and that you need some help there, and then start looking for the ones who might fill in those spots. Cool. Let's go into the last segment of the show, where I ask you a quick question and you give me a brief answer. Let's start with the self-reflective questions. So if you'd have the opportunity to meet yourself for a coffee, or your younger self for a coffee, you decide maybe at the beginning of GuiaBolso, because Kamino is still quite early on the journey. What advice would you offer to your younger self?
I mean, one which I think worked out positively is, choose your co-founders with a lot of care. So in this case, it was a great, 10-year run with Thiago, but that's, I think, kind of the biggest, thing that people might underestimate. And then I think the other is from the early days, really think about, financial viability and having that path. I think oftentimes if you're growing very quickly in terms of users, you're able to put off the monetization, and I'd say try to do it all at the same time, even though it's a challenge. And so now we're changing with Kamino, like thinking a lot from the early days about a viable financial model to go along with the user growth.
Right.
So those are kind of two learnings I would give for early stage founders.
Love it. And what are you the most proud of on your journey so far?
Yeah, I think it's hard as you're going oftentimes to kind of reflect and value what you've done. Now that we sold GuiaBolso and I'm doing something new, I think what I'm most proud of is we essentially created open banking in Brazil, and that's having a massive impact across all fintechs and the entire ecosystem for 200 million Brazilians. So that's been amazing to see, and that will continue to evolve.
Love it. Worst advice ever received?
That's a good one. I think like the worst kind of advice just in general is the non-constructive advice. And so it's like, why aren't you growing faster, or you should be growing faster, just generically, and so that's usually the worst. I think the other kind of worst thing that you can have in the early days as an investor is like, why is your accounts receivable going down? Why is your accounts, so they're looking like at your balance sheet before you even have product market fit. I think that's, a terrible distraction as well.
Good point. And now the resources, it can be business or non-business. This part of the show is much to get to know our guests a little bit better on the personal side. So favorite book?
Yeah, I mean, I think within the startup world, Hard Things About Hard Things by Ben Horowitz is kind of the Bible of what you're going to go through on that journey.
Right, good one. Favorite movie or series?
I'm not very good at series, but one which is maybe not my favorite ever, but I've enjoyed recently is Fauda, actually, which is set in Israel, and you see a lot of Israeli and Palestinian relations and everything. So it's not business related per se, but it's a very intense series.
It's definitely, we can learn a lot from those kind of movies, documentaries, and so on, to also learn about ourselves and psychology that is so important for founders, right? And finally, your favorite podcast, excluding this one.
Important disclaimer.
Exactly.
Actually, in terms of podcasts, there's a number, but so often I would, if I can, my favorite sometimes in terms of like really pinpoint insights actually are Frank Rotman from QED, his tweet storms, where he like takes a topic and he really breaks down, or some of his writings. I find him to be one of kind of the sharpest minds out there in fintech, and so I always look for whatever Frank is working on. Now he's gone deep into crypto, so he's a little bit more tangential for me, but he's a great great fintech mind.
Super original resources. We've never heard that one, so great addition to the list. Ben, anything else or anything that I should have asked, or any final message that you'd like to share with the community before we go?
No, I think we covered everything, and it's for founders who are aspiring to start out, build your network and ask for help, and just be really persistent and resilient. Those are the key, I think, ingredients. So wishing well you and your journey. I know that you're also starting a new company here, and congrats on the podcast, and thank you for the invitation.
Thank you, Ben. It was really a pleasure to have you on the show, and you are always inviting to come back. And also, all the best with Kamino and the work that you do for the ecosystem. We are super grateful for that. And to the community, thanks for being there. As you see, we keep bringing you the best of the best to make your life a little bit easier as you build and scale your company. See you soon, and keep scaling.